And finally, well, ALPA tried to change this, and this was kind of a dangerous one that probably the disabled pilots are more aware of, but it really would have established that Delta and ALPA had the right to change retiree benefits under the plan. ALPA agreed to change certain provisions of existing retired disabled pilots. And the bankruptcy court ruled, no, you can't do that. It stipulated that any pilot who had retired on or before June 1st of 2006 was not impacted by any of the provisions of LOA 51, okay, which try to change. If you establish that you can change retiree benefits, then you may be able to change them going forward. Currently, there is nothing that I can find in the disability and survivorship plan that gives Delta the right to change retiree benefits. They have the right to modify the plan, and they have the right to terminate the plan subject to ALPA's approval. But they don't have the right to modify benefits. And hopefully we're not going to have to go to court on that. The last item, which I think is kind of interesting and may have some eventual ramifications, is that ALPA was granted two things in the bankruptcy. They were granted a $2.1 billion claim in return for contract concessions and $650 million of a note if the pension plan was terminated. And ALPA was adamant about clarifying that the $2.1 billion was being given as a claim for contract concessions. Now let's take a look at this. One of the major contract concessions was $60 million out of the DNS trust. So I think it seems reasonable to expect ALPA to continue to enforce the DNS plan's existence even if the trust runs dry, in view of the fact that they were so richly rewarded that's one of the concessions for which they were so richly rewarded. The status of the plan today is can best be viewed by looking at the what is called a Form 5500. It's a required form that Delta has to submit every year. Typically, they submit it it's due in February. They usually get an extension and submit it on April 15th of the year following the plan year. So the one that should have gone in 2 days ago to the IRS would show what the plan had done by June 30th of 2007, which was the end of the plan year. The last one I have access to was for the plan year that ended in 2006, June 30th, 2006. And I've been asked, did the 60 million come out? I can't determine whether or not it came out in that particular year. I do know that at the end of that year, the DNS Trust had $1.615 billion of assets. Still a lot of money there, and that's what's kind of scary. People like to eyeball money when they need it. And then I looked at what are called the plan benefit obligations, and those were 1.7 billion and change. So right now, the plan obligations exceed the assets, but missing from that calculation was the $60 million or $300 million that is going to come out of the DNS plan between now and 2011. And it's mentioned in the financial notes, but it's not reflected as a plan benefit obligation. So even though we're upside down right now by about $100 million in the plan assets versus liabilities, we'll be upside down by about $400 million realistically in another 4 years. Still has a lot of money, still should pay for a while if they don't try to change it. But I think that there are some valid concerns. I'm going to take another look. 2011, if the assets of the DNS Trust fall below $1.2 billion, then Delta will have to make a contribution of the smaller of $60 million or 4% of free cash flow. Now, to clarify, moving forward, that doesn't become an indebtedness at that point. It's only for that year. So the assumption is, and I think it's a good assumption, that if the cash flow happened to be zero that year for Delta, that zero would be contributed and it would not be a lagging liability to the corporation. I want to look at what could happen in the future. These are great benefits, but what could happen in the future? And first of all, I'd like to read from a letter that's dated March 3rd. That's an open letter to the DLRC, the non-pilot group, but they brought about some issues, and it addresses the pilot DNS plan as well as the non-pilot. But I'll quote here, "We have repeatedly said that we have no intention of changing these benefits." Now, these are the DNS plan benefits. "In the future, whether or not the trust pays them has excess assets." Now, that sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Now I want to read to you something out of what they call the summary plan description, which is maybe like reading the fine print in the contract before you sign it. "As with all Delta benefits, Delta reserves the right at any time to amend, modify, or terminate all or any part of its benefit plans at its sole discretion, subject to applicable collective bargaining restrictions, including the benefits described in this section of the Delta Pilot's Benefit Handbook." Now, this is the disability and survivorship section. "Any such amendment, modification, or termination may apply to active employees, their dependents and survivors, as well as former employees, inactive employees, retirees, disabled personnel, and personnel on leave of absence, and each of their dependents and survivors. Any amendment or modification may be applied prospectively or retroactively and may be applied only to one group of participants, such as retirees, but not to other groups of participants." Now, I have trouble balancing these two letters because what it is, well, we promise we intend to give you this benefit, but if you want to read the small print, we're going to maintain it, even to the point that coming out of bankruptcy, the intended language in the plan of reorganization before John Erickson and his group got involved and at least stirred the pot and argued, read, "Except as expressly set forth in the retiree term sheets, the reorganized debtors may unilaterally modify or terminate any retiree benefits, including health and welfare benefits, in accordance with the terms of the plan, program, policy, or document under which such benefits are established or maintained." Now, one of the problems there is that I can't find anywhere in the document of the pilot DNS plan that Delta has the right to modify retiree benefits. And yet, if you read that, that would have said that was there. Through John Erickson's efforts, through the efforts of his attorney, Chuck Dyke, there was additional wording added that said, "However, nothing herein," and I'll just kind of paraphrase, "nothing herein gives Delta any greater right than they had under non-bankruptcy law, and they don't have the right to terminate any benefits that are deemed to be vested," but they kind of argue that maybe we'll have that argument later on whether or not they're vested or non-vested benefits.